Well, good evening and welcome back to the Journey Home program. I'm your host, John Mark Grodi, here at EWTN. And once again, we have this great opportunity to come together to hear a story of faith and conversion. We're joined tonight by Erika Bachiochi. She's a former agnostic and now a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. Really honored to have her here tonight. Erika, thanks for being here.
Wonderful to be here with you.
It's wonderful to have you here to share your story. Again, the next part of the story is to share the story. So thanks for being here to do that with us.
Absolutely.
I've got a lot to cover tonight, but let's go back to the beginning. Where does your story begin in terms of your faith background, your family, and all of that?
Well, it begins with baptism, if you can believe it. So I was baptized as an infant and had my first communion at the normal time, second grade. And then I guess everything sort of fell apart. Actually, my mom and dad were divorced when I was 4, but then my mom remarried and divorced a second time around the time I was 12. She went on actually to marry again and divorced by the time I was 19. But after that second divorce, I fell into basically by like 13, 14, even though I'd promised in my 8th grade, drugs and alcohol assembly, never to use drugs, like the very next year.
You went back on that?
I did.
Oh,
I did.
Goodness.
I went back on it. And by 13, 14, was kind of hanging out with the wrong crowd, you could say, and was, partying every weekend, experimenting with different kinds of drugs. And I think where it started to affect me first is I was a very talented athlete as a kid, young girl, and that's where I could start to see sort of the fall off of my capacity, like my confidence was waning. Just things like, getting high and then going. So I was a very good swimmer and just literally swimming laps while having tried to, hopefully not having the effects of the marijuana or whatever. So that's where I started to affect it. Yeah.
High school.
Yeah. And that actually all came to a screeching halt by the time I was right on 16, 17, because one of these guys I was hanging out with a lot took his own life. He had been in a skiing accident the year before. He had been an excellent skier, grew up in Maine. And then exactly to the day when he'd become paralyzed, he took his own life.
Oh, that's terrible.
And so that actually, what was fascinating about that is that I couldn't cry. And so everyone around me was like, this was a tragic event in our high school. I had been particularly close to him, and I couldn't grieve. And so, they got me help basically. So I went and saw a counselor. And as soon as I walked into this therapist's office, I just totally broke down. And right when she said, "Tell me about this boy." So from there, she was able to really, I can't remember how long I worked with her, but she was really able to help me a lot. And I started from there. I'm an incredibly intense person. So every aspect of my journey is incredibly intense. So from that stage, I'm 16, 17 years old. I'm about a senior in high school at this point, still an athlete, pretty decent student. I'm in the highest classes, but I'm not, at the tip top of the class or anything. And I just start getting into the self-help movement. So I start going to 12-step meetings. I start reading a ton of self-help literature, and I start spending my time not with my high school. I'd always spent time with the older kids with parties and stuff, and then I just basically fell off and just started going to the meetings and just spending the time with these actually really incredible women who sort of supported me and loved me to some semblance of at that point with the health I could know, and started me praying. And I would say that that's when I started praying. I remember as a young child having some sense. My grandmother actually had converted to Catholicism when she was a teenager, and she would send us these kind of Catholic pamphlets in the mail. She would send us pro-life things in the mail, and I was the one who would always go. We'd have to walk up to get our mail, so I'd kind of read them on the way home. And I think I even put a little Jesus, little Sacred Heart next to my bed at some point. But there was no, deep sense of. We weren't going to church or anything, so it was just sort of a sense God's here, but that's about it. So I really started praying. And got myself to college, played soccer in college, went to this small liberal arts school, Middlebury College in Vermont. And the summer after my freshman year, I went back home and spent a lot of time with my dearest male friend in high school. He also is a soccer player. He was an incredibly talented soccer player, and he had a really hard time at college. And so I was spending a ton of time with him. Well, that August, he hung himself.
Oh, dear.
And that was, I mean, the first time was really hard.
Yeah.
But it was like he was like, it felt like it was other people's tragedy, right? I was like removed from it in some sense. And this was like, it was incredibly devastating. And so I'd had like the support of the 12-step meetings. Even when I was at Middlebury, I would like kind of walk down to the town, go to the meetings there. But I just didn't, it's like I didn't have a compass. And I had God. I mean, I prayed some, but I was so devastated. And really at that point, emotionally, I wouldn't say I was suicidal, like with a plan. Like he had a plan and he executed. Mm-hmm. And but like if a truck had struck me down, it would have been okay. Like just really, and with a person who always had like a lot of energy for life, you know, in athletics and just enthusiasm for life, I just sort of really become depressed.
Yeah.
A lot of anxiety and stuff like that. So I went back to the meetings I was attending, and I was like, all right, I'm back here and I'm going to get serious now. Like these have been basically like support groups for me,
sure.
But I've heard about the steps. So maybe I should do something about that. And there were always, I mean, it's almost like, you know, you pick the people who you really want to give advice to. And so I'd always kind of gone with the people who were like, oh yeah, it's a support group, keep coming back, you know, stuff like that. And I got back that fall to college, and I picked the most hardcore woman in the room who had done like crazy, I mean, had like stolen drugs from the hospital she had worked in and shot herself up. I mean, like crazy story, which was nothing like, I mean, I was like a little puny, you know, like did some drinking when I was a teenager. And so I found her and I just was like, can you work the steps with me?
Yeah. And
so that's what we did. And it was incredibly transformative. And so I'm sure, you know, people know something about the steps, but I'd already kind of done the first 3 steps, which of course is like, clearly life is powerless. And I turned my, you know, life over to God and asked him to sort of intervene in my life. But that was the 4th step that I really needed to get to. And so what's really cool about the 4th step that I still think is, I always think like when Catholics are having a rough time, it's like, gosh, if you could just work the steps, that would be really great.
Oh, I totally agree. A colleague of ours, Brother Rex Norris, talked about this, is that yeah, sometimes you go to the 12 steps in the basement. Yeah. They need a little bit more than upstairs because it's interesting, the metaphor of like seeing it as a support group versus working the steps. Yeah. I mean, like what a great metaphor even for how many people treat the faith.
Yes.
Right, like it's
Indeed.
Nice. It makes me feel good. It's kind of a distraction for a while, but am I actually going to work it?
That's
am
right.
I going to actually do what Jesus said and follow in his footsteps?
Yeah.
Right? Like,
that's right. No, it's so true, and it really is the path that led me to Christ. So the 4th step. Yeah. What's so clever about it, I mean, just so inspired, it seems to me, is that, you know, it's not sort of like, oh, what did you do wrong? It's not like you're getting ready for a confession, right? It's not an examination of conscience, right? When you know you've done something wrong. No, well, they started
it's like, not only that.
Yeah, well, no. But this is how, you get there.
Yeah.
But the way you start is that you list your resentments.
Oh, that's right.
You don't, so you get there. That's where they're bringing you.
Right. Okay.
But you list your resentments and you list your fears. And so the whole process at the beginning is literally just writing down all the resentments you have, and then why you have them, and then how they've impacted you. And then once you've kind of done all that part, then you say, what's my part in it? And and then you ask God, how can I see this differently? How can I see this through your eyes? And so the whole process is like helping bring you from someone who's like turned inward, you know, resenting the world as though you're, you know, everybody's out to get you, you know, they're the problem with your life, to turning and seeing like, yes, there are objective things that may have happened to you in your life that are wrongs, for sure. Yeah. But that you're, you know, this is your life, you're the protagonist in it, and it's time to like let go. Yeah. And so, but also see your part, even if it's like the tiniest sliver. And so what was so beautiful is I found myself in this all women's meeting one Saturday, and, you know, their kids around and everything. And I remember looking around, and I was in this process, and I had, you know, done all this work on my mom, who of course, you know, by now has been, you know, married 3 times. She's at this point had left Maine, where we grew up, for her to sort of follow her 3rd husband to the Netherlands. So she didn't even live in the country anymore. Wow. She had sold her house. And so I had a lot of resentment and for all sorts of reasons. And so I'm in this meeting with all these women, and I'm hearing them talk about like how hard it is to be mothers, like with all of the wounds they have, with all they're struggling with. And I just immediately, I mean, it was like literally God just sending this beautiful sense of kind of proportion, like perspective for me. And I realized like my mom, like how she was raised. Yes, she had this, her mom had converted to Catholicism, but the way she was raised was really tragic in a lot of ways, in terms of like abuse and not by her mother, but by her stepfather. And her mother had this horrible migraine and just a lot of illnesses, which put her in bed for a long time. So she didn't, wasn't interacting with her. There's a whole like generational story, generational wounds that my mother had like taken on. And actually she was doing pretty well. Like she was like a really decent person. Like, yes, she suffered and had these particular wounds, but there was a lot she gave to me, like work ethic, just really taking athletics seriously. Like just, there's so many things that she gave me. And so at that moment, I just had this sense of like kind of the scales falling through her eyes and just realizing like, she is God's beloved daughter. I am God's beloved daughter. And like, we're the same. Like we both have these wounds. We both are trying to do our best out of them. And like, I have all this, I didn't know it was called grace at that point, but I have all this grace that I'm like, help I'm being given. Like, what help has she gotten, So she was in the Netherlands. I got myself on a plane and I went to visit her, and I did the ninth step with her, which was like apologizing to her for like holding on to resentment so much that every interaction we had was this kind of like, well, you're the one who has wronged me, lady. And, here I am better than you or something. And so it was like we flipped the switch on our whole relationship. Which was so beautiful, so that by the time she felt the need to escape actually that third marriage, she knew who she could call and she could come home. And I ended up living with her at some point during graduate school. So it was just like this beautiful thing. It's never like a perfect relationship, but it's like we love each other so much. So that was really incredible. And during that time, I remember having just this sense of like the generational wounds, like having, whether it's a dream or just a sense of this kind of like a wave of, now later you can think about sort of original sin and, and I didn't know about that stuff at this point, but just the way in which like the impact of people's wrongs on generation after generation, and having the sense of like, it's stopping with me. Like, no, it's not going any further. Like, I'm going to do something differently. And so that meant having to do with relationships. It meant having to do with, well, I don't know what it meant having to do with, because I didn't know myself well enough. But so meanwhile, while all this is happening, and I'm spending a lot of time in those meetings literally downtown in Middlebury, on campus, I am playing soccer, but because I wasn't drinking and doing all those things that like athletes tend to do in college, I'd kind of stopped the sex, drugs, and rock and roll, where like that was in high school. So I was like, in terms of friendships, I started hanging out in the women's center and took women's studies classes and hanging out with a lot of like theater crowd people who loved that I was like spiritual but not religious, And so my sort of intellectual moments, you could say I had some sort of like spiritual kind of conversion where like God was really the center of my life, like kind of the unknown God, like God as I understand God in the 12 steps. And really like I prayed every day for help. Like it was a real spiritual experience I was having. It was a real sense of God is with me. I come to him for like help with anxiety. I feel peace when I pray. And even my friends, like my theater friends, were kind of asking for help from me, like in guidance in like the spiritual life, And I still had a bit of a new agey spin on it and all that. And so I became very kind of interested in, Bernie Sanders was my congressman at that time, volunteered for his campaign, kind of called myself a socialist feminist, led the Women's Center at some point, probably sophomore year, and was of course very pro-choice. That was just sort of like, kind of came with the drinking water. And so was very, very active in that, helped with like the unionizing effort on campus. And so in all of this, I mean, I was very kind of animated, and like it was very important to me, very activist. Like, we did a sit-in for a women's studies professor who didn't get tenure. You can kind of imagine it all. This is like the mid 90s. And so I decided I'm going to go down to DC instead of going abroad. I decided I'm going to go to DC for a semester. And so I go down there, and I have all these incredible things happen intellectually. So still I'm going to meetings, but I'm the professor who I was studying with. I did a did a semester in kind of American politics and public law. So we had an internship, which I did, on welfare reform right when welfare was being reformed in the mid-1990s. And then this professor was incredible, and he introduced kind of all these thinkers who kind of, without getting into too much detail, like opened my mind, especially on life issues, but other things as well. And it's not like I just became pro-life, right, but I started to have like a more of an understanding. And then he also brought in people on different sides of political issues. So it was the first time on the abortion issue, someone came in, Helen Alvarez, actually, I don't know if you know the name, but incredible pro-life speaker, legal scholar. And when I heard the pro-choice woman, she was kind of angry and all the things that we sort of typically can kind of think of maybe someone who's pro-choice, even though I agreed with what she was saying. And then the pro-life person came in and I thought like, oh, what's this person going to say? And I don't remember a single thing she said. But what I do remember is that, remember, I'm a person who's like wanting to live a better life, like really like thinking of myself as someone who's close to God. And I'm listening to this woman and watching her. And though I'm sort of not so quite sure with her arguments, she's like a person who's alive. Like she has all this life in her. She's friendly and kind. And she turned out working for the Catholic bishops at that point. She was their spokesperson. And so when I went back up to Middlebury, I changed my major. I walked right into my sociology women's studies professor room, and I said, I think I'm going to start studying political philosophy, because I had sort of started studying constitutional law when I was in DC, some political philosophy, and I was like, I think I'm going to head this way and take this class on like ancient philosophy, and what it was just this sense of I'd left Vermont as an activist. Yeah. And I came back as a student. Like I was now not so much like pushing what I thought I knew the world should be like, but it was now like, it's time to seek the truth. Yeah. Like it's time to sense of like, I'm not the truth, and there might be something I don't know. And I'd like really to study hard and try to figure out what that is. Which is an intellectual thing, but it's also, it's a heart thing, right? Yeah, it's absolutely. It reminds me of the beginning of the Gospel of Mark, where Jesus says, repent and believe the gospel, right? Before we can even like really consider truth, a change has to happen that opens us. That's right. And now we're ready to kind of seek and to learn. So great place to pause for a moment. We'll be back again in just a couple minutes to hear the rest of Erika's story. In the meantime, check out chnetwork.org. You can find so many conversion stories like hers from every conceivable background, probably one from a similar one to yours. So check that out at chnetwork.org. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Journey Home program. We're entering the second half of our show here tonight. We're speaking with Erika Bachiochi. She's a former agnostic and a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. Erika, thanks for sharing your story with us. Wow, lots happened so far. When we left off, again, a great place to leave off at, you left Vermont as an activist and you came back ready to be a student, to really seek the truth in a new way that you hadn't before. So pick us up there. What happened next? Yeah, so I really dove into my studies, and I can tell you I just loved reading Plato and Aristotle, John Henry Newman. There were some incredible philosophers, professors who were there, and so I just really dove in and enjoyed my time so much doing that. But still was going down to my meetings, and still probably would have considered myself very religious kind of skeptic. And I would say as a pro-choice feminist, I mean, I really did consider the Catholic Church as kind of it's the great patriarchy, the kind of the worst place for women in the church. So even if there was a sense of like, oh, maybe they do some good things for the poor, which obviously I cared a lot about the poor, that's all I knew. I wasn't really interested in anything else. And so it was amazing. I mean, what an incredible grace-filled thing that my college, this very secular liberal arts school, hosted a symposium that January. So I came back in the fall that January on religion. And so what we do at Middlebury is we take, the whole of January, take one class. And then you do all these sorts of other things and you ski and whatever. So I took a class, and I think all the classes, I mean, I don't remember for sure, but at least my class was called Uses of Adversity. And so of course, given that you just heard all the adversity, and I don't remember a lot of what we read, but I do know that there were some religious aspects. So again, so here I am like opening. But then there are all these lectures. And so this is where it became very, very fun. So I remember going to a lecture of the great Protestant scholar Stanley Hauerwas, who some of your listeners may know. And so again, I don't remember exactly what he said, but I do remember going up to him afterwards and saying, like I go to these 12-step meetings, really, love God, but I don't know what to do. I mean, he's like, well, you got to go to church. And I was like, well, okay, but like, what church do I go to? And here's this like Protestant guy, right? He looks at me and goes, well, what church, were you baptized? And I said, well, yeah, I was baptized in the Catholic Church. And he goes, get yourself back to the Catholic Church.
Oh, wow.
And I leave there like kind of shuddering my boots, like, yeah, right, So then, same month, and I go to another lecture, and this one is called The Catholic Worker Movement and Recovery from Drug Addiction.
Oh, wow.
And this one,
Fun.
Yeah, totally. So I go and I'm thinking like, what do these Catholics know about drug addiction? Like, give me a break. Like, there are all these, like, oh, I'm so holy people or whatever. So I go thinking I'm gonna, I don't know, one up the guy. Who knows what I'm thinking I'm gonna do? But again, I'm like still a person who's like opened a lot by now, and so I am totally floored by this lecture. So much so that again, with all my audacity and intensity, I go up to the speaker afterward. And I just said, like, you're incredible. There was the Catholic guy who had brought him was a very tall, dark, handsome Catholic student. And we get talking so much that they were like, Erika, why don't you just come along with us? We're going to go get coffee. And so I go and get coffee at a place where, I had been there so many times because the women there were unionizing. So I'd like spend time. They had their union buttons. I was like, yeah. So we go in and we start having this incredible conversation about prayer. And just, it was all the things that I had to leave campus to go and talk about down at my meetings. And here I am, like, in my own, I almost was like looking around, like, is anyone going to see me,
Yeah.
But here I am, we're having these incredible conversations. And they said, they obviously could tell I was very animated by this. And they said, well, the next thing we're doing is going to the Newman Club meeting. So why don't you come along? And I said, well, what's that? And they said, well, it's the Catholic student group on campus. And I was like, and so, but what did I have to lose? It's not like that, So I remember walking up the hill that, Middlebury College is like built on this hill. So we're walking up the hill, and I so remember, I don't have a great memory, but I so remember looking at the Catholic student and saying, wait, what is it that you guys believe about God? Isn't it like a Trinity or something? Like, what is that all about? And I have no idea. We're sending the steps, and obviously he doesn't solve like the problem of the Trinity for me in the minutes we're moving up, like the question of the Trinity. But we get up to the room, and it's this incredible hour of like cognitive dissonance where I am so like captured by these students who are, here they are on campus, my age, talking about faith, like their reliance on prayer, their struggles with humility. I mean, they're talking about the virtues basically. And they're talking about it in a way that was so familiar to me, like just like my 12-step people were talking. But the cognitive dissonance is that interspersed with all this, I mean, they're Catholics. So they're talking about Mary and the Rosary and the church and the saints. And I am just like, what the heck is going on? So I leave, end up and I leave and I go back to my dorm room. And what had been my habit was I every night got on my knees because this is what I've been taught, my great sponsor and others in the 12-step meeting rooms. And I said, so you and I know each other really well. Like, you like kind of save me every day. Like, I just feel like we're really close, but do you have a son? And I literally just asked God, who I called Father. I mean, we prayed the Lord's Prayer at the end of every meeting. I said, do you have a son? And that is the moment, I mean, where like everything changed, because of course, like,
wow.
The father's going to be like, oh, let me just tell you. So these great Catholic students showed up at the door the next day. I don't know if it was the next day, and one had a Bible. I remember I still have a big red Catholic Bible. And another was one of the men on the soccer team. And he brought me a copy of Mere Christianity, and by C.S. Lewis, of course. Yeah. And I want to tell you about that book and how it changed my life. But I also want to tell you about this soccer player who, his name's Josh. And he said, let's go. And we knew each other because we were both on the soccer team. He said, let's go have lunch. And so we went, and his dad was, had been a part of 12 Steps. So he knew that language.
Yeah.
And over lunch, he just translated for me. He translated like Christian basics into AA language and vice versa. So he basically said, like, when we're talking about sin, because I was not, like you're hearing like sin, it's just like separating yourself from God, and when you hear grace, it's just like the outpouring of God's love into your heart. And so I'm sort of like, and while he's talking about this, because he's basically defanging all of these like intimidating religious words to me.
Right.
Like it's just translation.
Yeah.
And so he then, during this talk, I'm realizing like I'm kind of like living like a Christian and not even knowing it. Like I, at this point, am totally chaste. Like after alcohol's gone, it was like, there was nothing to like prod that on. So I had just been like, everything was gone, and I'm living as this kind of like pro-choice feminist who's also has this like robust spiritual life and doesn't even know who is saving her. And so it's just like this incredible moment. Of course, all of it's kind of uncomfortable, totally uncomfortable. Yeah. But I'm sort of like leaving my, so here I always like would go and dine, with the theater crowd. And I'm like, there they are. Let me go find the Christians. And so I'm like trying to find the Christians on campus, like to find and have conversations. And, I'm now a trained lawyer, but I had the same personality then. And so I'm going and like just grilling them. And I remember being I stayed one week and did some like service work with them. And I just remember literally like just every question I had, these poor kids were just like, what about this? What about that? But what's beautiful about Mere Christianity, I want to get back to that because it's framed so well, like where I was at that moment. So there are 2 back-to-back chapters in that book on faith. Mm-hmm. And the first chapter is about like kind of the creed, like the Apostles' Creed, just like what do we believe as Christians, mere Christians, right? And when I was reading, I was like, oh, okay, this is, like kind of foreign to me. I'd gotten to my first communion in 2nd grade, but like what were we coloring Jesus pictures or something? There wasn't a lot of catechesis going on. Wasn't raised at all in the faith. So I'm sort of like, oh, okay. And then I get to the 2nd chapter, and the 2nd chapter is really about trust. And it's basically like you've come to your wit's end and you realize like you can't do any of this on your own. And so you throw in the towel and you ask for God's help. And he's like, and that's where he said, some people who have the first part, that first chapter on, they don't have the second part. And here I am thinking, well, I have the second part, but I don't have the first part. Because that's exactly what every single day with me was basically like, I can't do this. I have all this, like, whether it was dealing with the depression, anxiety before, or just like getting through the day, it was like, I'm always throwing in the towel and asking for God's help, Yeah. So that was just this amazing place where it was like I felt heard, mm-hmm. I felt known. And I'll tell you, one of the really important parts of my relationships with these Christians, because I started coming around more, I was going to InterVarsity, the ones who took me seriously, who were like, you are like with us, like you have progressed, you are actually someone who prays, you are being remade by Christ without even knowing it. Like those are the ones who brought me so far along. Whereas the ones who kind of like look down their nose, like, who are you? We used to see you at the rallies, like that was harder, right? And so that aspect of just being like brought in. So what they did is they said, Erika, there's a New Testament class. You should take it with us. So that spring, not much time has gone by, like January, that spring, I signed up for a New Testament class. And this is actually very amusing too, because the professor was a Methodist who was part of like the Q seminar. Is that what it's called? It's like the Jesus seminar where I think it's called Q. I probably should have looked this up before, but basically they line up the gospels side by side, right. And whatever is like consistent between the gospels. Well, of course they don't even deal with John because John's like, too religious or something. But anyway, they line up the 3 synoptic gospels and whatever's like consistent in all 3 of them. Well, that's actually what happened. And so during this class, I'm like taking this in and I'm reading the scriptures for the first time. And I'm like, this guy's wrong. This guy's wrong. And the reason I knew that is because there were passages where Jesus spoke in the scriptures with authority to my heart And I knew the things he was saying were true because I'd experienced them, right? It's like so many aspects of like the 12 steps that come out of, the Oxford movement. I mean, come out of like a Christian sort of understanding were there in the person Jesus. Yeah. And I like fell in love. I was like, not only does this guy speak with authority, like here's a teacher, here's like the truth, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like I became so animated that I literally was in the class. So here's like, everyone's looking at me like, weren't you just the feminist, right? And I'm like arguing with this guy, like, no, you couldn't, because this somehow like, this is right. And so it was just like studying the scriptures and like kind of like going to battle with this guy was, animating me. And at that point is when I went on that trip with the Christians. And so I spent, I would say, that year or so kind of starting to go to different Protestant churches. Spent the summer living at with my dad and my stepmother, still going to meetings, and I'd sneak out on Sunday mornings. They were kind of like, they're Catholic but not practicing. So they were like, what's she doing? Like, what Protestant church is she going to?
And why was that? Was it just still because the Catholic Church was a bridge too far?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So I'll dabble over here just to be kind of safe.
That's right. Okay. That's right. And the Christians, like, on campus, there weren't a lot of Catholics, like, in InterVarsity. Okay. And so it turns out that there would be, so what happened when I got back is, or maybe it was that spring, I'm not sure exactly what, but I was I guess no, it would have been the fall. So I get back, and this one woman I was telling you, she was actually Greek Orthodox, who was like really like, I did a Bible study with her and a group of girls that spring. And she was like really, I remember her writing me a note that just said, you're really being remade by Christ. Like I can see that. And just like, keep coming. Like she really saw my journey as something that was like a serious one, even though I wasn't all the way there or whatever. She was Greek Orthodox, and she had also been kind of going from Protestant church to Protestant church. And our one stalwart men's soccer player who had brought me Mere Christianity and done the translating, he was Catholic. And so he had said to her, the Catholic Church is a lot closer to the Greek Orthodox Church, so why don't you come to the Catholic Church instead? And so she called me one day after I had gone to all these I don't know which Protestant church I'd been at that time, but I had gotten on my knees and I'd said, like, which church, God, do you want me to go to? And in the back of my head, I had, well, but not the Catholic Church, because like, that's just like, in terms of women's stuff, that's just not going to work for me. So she calls me and she says, Josh has been saying I should go to the Catholic Church. Why don't you just come with me? And so the next week we went and so walk into this beautiful church. And there's the crucifix, like up on the wall. And just throughout that whole mass, I just had a sense of like, I'm not going anywhere. Like this is, I don't know, what's, in terms of like what they believe, but like, this is where I'm supposed to be. And whether that was, it felt like actually like home because I'd been baptized and had my first communion. And so what was incredible was the priest there, who's actually now the Bishop of Vermont.
Wow.
Father John McDermott, he was the priest there, and so the chaplain at Middlebury. And prior to that, I'd seen him on campus at some point, because he'd come around with the students, but I saw him on campus at some point, and I said, so Father John, again, my audacity, why are you Catholic? And he had said to me, because it's the easiest route to heaven. And so, of course, I was like, that sounds totally ridiculous. But seeing him say the Mass, I just wanted to spend more time with him. So he actually, knowing that I was, had my first communion, all that, like he got, and he allowed me to come to confession, of course. And so I'd already like practiced with the 5th step. So I had a ton to confess, which is awesome. And then he brought me through the catechism, and he had actually studied political philosophy in college. So he and I were like intellectually on very kind of like same wavelength in terms of the kinds of questions I had were the kinds of questions he wanted to talk about in going through the catechism. And so that semester just totally fell in love with the church. And as it so happens, as these things work, there was a professor who was visiting, who was a Catholic in the political science department. And he told me about a professor who he thought I should go study with for a master's in theology, who actually had a background in political science as well. So it was kind of like the perfect mixing of the two interests that I had. And so from there, I applied and went off to study Catholic theology, not even confirmed yet. And that's where a lot of kind of incredible things. This was at Boston College. So went the next year and was confirmed
Yeah.
as an adult.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm still the woman who's my confirmation sponsor. I took, Our Lady as my confirmation saint because I needed the best. I needed all the help I could get. And she's still my closest friend, the woman who's my confirmation sponsor then, a good 25 years later. And I lived with this woman who was in my program, who was the oldest child of a Catholic family. And it was incredible. So I was still going to meetings, but she was like, hey, why don't you come to daily mass with me? Hey, why don't I teach you the rosary? And then I just was eating it all up. And so I actually, started, going, I wasn't having issues with any type of substance, anything like that. And who knows, in the end, I spent so little time and I still haven't had any substance since. I've never drank in 30 years, but I really saw that I could do a lot more good and that I needed a lot of the graces from the sacrament. So I started going to daily mass, and she just helped me learn so much. It was like I had catechism in my house because she knew so much and I knew so little, even though I'm sitting here studying, the church fathers and Augustine and Thomas Aquinas at a high level. There's just all this basic stuff that I don't know, we believe in angels, that was kind of true, so I had that background that I believed in angels as kind of this new age stuff, but we believe in they're real, Erika, they're real. And she taught me about natural family planning. She taught me, the Salve Regina that I still sing to my children every night, when they go to bed. So it was a really magical time being there. And I want to get to this last part, which is really great, but I don't know if you have.
Oh, we got time.
You're good, yeah.
We're good. Yeah.
So the obvious part of my story that still needed a lot of healing was having to do with those 3 marriages that my mom had. Mm. And so the lack of models. And I did... by the grace of God, I had this incredible Protestant family I lived with one summer in Middlebury. So one of the summers I spent actually so that I could spend more time with my friends in the 12 steps, but also I decided to wash windows one summer, which was the hardest job other than motherhood and starting a school, which we'll get to soon. That was a really hard job. Anyway, so, and during that time I lived with this incredible Protestant family who are very lively in their faith. I learned then how to pray before grace before meals. They brought in foster children. They were just incredibly generous. So I had that model, and that was a beautiful model of a marriage. They were so joyful in their marriage. They loved each other so much, so tender. So I had that. But otherwise, I really, I really didn't have a lot. So, so when I was going to daily mass, there's this beautiful stone chapel at BC. And so I would put my heart in the tabernacle every day. And there are these written up on the stained glass, there's ora et labora. So I would just be praying for my work. What's my work? I mean, I didn't know if I was supposed to be religious. I didn't know what I was supposed to do, but I just knew that my heart needed healing no matter what around men. And one of the things that had really convicted me when I was coming back to kind of be open to Christianity was this idea in Genesis 3 of a sense that part of the fall was a sense that I was ruled over by men, that men had ruled over me. And it's no sense, I'd never been abused or anything like that. There was no sense in which, obviously I had my feminist theories about that, but it was more a sense of how obsessed my mind was about what men thought of me. There was a clear wound that was still there. Because I just, it's the father wound, right? So I had at that point spent time with my dad, and that was actually another beautiful thing that God gave me was his marriage. My mom and his marriage was annulled, and he was married in the church, even though they didn't practice, but they now are, decades on in their marriage, and they have a beautiful marriage. So that was one other great witness I had. And another thing just before that happened at Middlebury was that there was this political science student who I became really close friends with. He was actually Catholic, but I don't know if he was practicing. But and he had a girlfriend at home, and we became so close. But it was he was unavailable, and so we had this friendship, really wonderful kind of friendship. We really loved each other, but it was totally platonic and beautiful and encouraging to me. So all those things set up this time where I was there going to daily mass, knowing I needed healing, putting my heart in the tabernacle, not knowing like what you're calling me to, what vocation. At this point, I'm like thoroughly in the Catholic mindset, but knowing no matter what, like, I mean, by now I'm I've been introduced to John Paul II's theology of the body, his teachings on women. Like, I'm thoroughly in love with everything I'm learning. I mean, in the sense of how much richer, like all the feminist questions I had to me were answered so much better by this Holy Pope. And so this is like, I want this so much, and I want whatever it is that he's going to give me, but I know that my wounds are deep. And so I, at that point, had a spiritual director who was, guiding me along. And I came into her one time and I said, so I've decided that this Lent, I'm giving up men. And she was like, what? And I said, I know, it's not like I have lots of dates, but I have decided that I'm going to give up this obsessive stuff that I do. It's like, I think partly when you become Catholic too, it's like you can take that with you into like, oh, imagining yourself in the wedding dress, imagining what your marriage is going to be like. And it becomes like this almost like idol, like the Catholic marriage is an idol, And so, oh, I could get married to that guy, oh, that guy. And I kind of like, and so I decided I'm not going to flirt. I'm not going to go looking for them. I'm not going to imagine every time the image comes in, I'm just going to let it sail right by, or every time this idea comes in. And so for those weeks, I'm going to like just men are off the table, like the question of marriage is off the table. And I mean, in part, like, let's see if there's other vocations and things like that as well. And so just before Lent starts, there is a Chubby Sunday. I don't even know if Chubby Sunday is a thing, okay?
This is the first I've heard of it.
Exactly. I don't think it's a thing, but the theology master students and the philosophy master students got together in this lovely stone chapel that I'd mentioned that I spent a lot of time in, to write the Sunday before Ash Wednesday. So there's like Fat Tuesday, gotcha. Chubby Sunday.
Yeah.
And so we had this mass, and this man, Dan, came along, and he had been a student at BC before, and he had been invited by the priest. And so he came, and he was there, and we went and had all these cookies afterward, and there were kids around. It was super fun. And I actually, at that time, I remember saying something about wanting to start a school. I was like, wouldn't it be great if we could start a school? It could be totally Catholic, and we could, and I remember my roommate was there. She's like, yeah, Dan, you could teach math, because he was like in technology. We were just dreaming, like kids dreaming or whatever. And when we left, my roommate said to me, like, that guy Dan is so great. I'd love to, get to know him or whatever. And I had kind of seen him eyeing me. So I'm like, this is perfect. Like, she can have the guy. Like, this is great. I'm giving him up for Lent. And then like, she can have the guy. Cause I was like much more outgoing and she was quieter and lovely. And so 2 weeks into Lent, they have these beautiful sung, Novus Ordo, but sung masses with lots of Latin. And so we go back and Dan comes back. And the theology and philosophy students are going out to eat afterwards. And so my roommate says, go invite Dan. Like, we should get Dan to come. So I go up to him and I say, hey, would you like to come? So he comes. And over the course of this meal, it becomes obvious that like we're very attracted to each other. And I mean, I could get into the details, but there's probably not enough time. But I'm like hearing that he plays soccer in an intramural thing. He's teaching CCD, whatever. So anyway, people realize what's going on. And so people kind of leave, and he gives me a ride home. And so we're outside of my apartment, and he's got like, the rosary around his like stick shift. The fact that he drives a stick, also a plus. Cause I was like, yeah, always what I drove. And so he asked me for my number, and I tell him, I'm like, oh my gosh, what do I say? And I said, well, I've given up dating for Lent. And of course, this is like so cool to him. And so I said, but let me just think about like whether we should just talk on the phone. So I do give him my number, and I talked to my spiritual director, and I was like, well, this is actually perfect because I'll just like not flirt on the phone, and we'll just get to know each other as friends. And boy, was that like so much what like our Lord wanted for our relationship. So we were able to I was able to get to know him, to just really listen to his, one conversation I remember him talking about the Eucharist and like how he was teaching his class about the Eucharist. And I had like fallen so much in love with the Eucharist by then. So it was just like this like wholesome way to start this relationship that I never would have been able to do on my own. I mean, I can tell you for sure, I would have totally killed the thing if it had been some other way of doing it. So after Lent, he takes me out, and it takes us a while. Because we're running buddies and all that. And over time, he just, ends up becoming the man that I would marry. And what an incredible marriage. We actually just celebrated 25 years.
Oh, congratulations. Wow.
And we have 7 children.
Wonderful.
And so marriage and motherhood with him, I remember thinking like, I really want this. I really want this beautiful like icon of the wedding feast. But like, can I do this? And I remember thinking like with him, I think I can. And that has been, I'm getting teary. That has been how it's been with him, is just, he has a lot of virtue. Yeah. And so it's just been like the backstop. It's amazing to be, and I would just say with marriage, it's amazing how like God has been so real to me since like I was 17, right? Mm-hmm. And more and more and more beautiful, like revealing himself. But to have like a man who just loves me no matter what, is like there unconditionally, has just been such a healing process. Like, so all of marriage, I mean, I would say the first 10 years was still like hard for me, but then now I look back and I just feel like marriage itself was like healed, like his love, God's love through my husband. And then each child, like pulling out of me more and more love. Mm-hmm. Even though it was hard, like, I mean, me having like children rapid fire in 10 years, 6 children in 10 years, and then having another 7 years later, it was hard because I, again, didn't have, like, there were people in the community, but I didn't have a lot of like great, Catholic families, we're going to do this. And like, that just wasn't my experience. We were like building from the ground floor up. Yeah. And so I had a lot of flaws, and, my kids know I have a lot of flaws, but each of my children, so they're now 24 down to 7. And so mainly on the upper side, and they all just have incredible love for Christ and his church, incredible prayer. I mean, I think one of the most beautiful things of being someone like who's a wounded and like grasping at grace all the time and like needing that for my own growth and virtue has just been like mom's going to fail you sometimes, but you have the church who is your mother, and you have Mary who's your mother, and you have Christ who will always be there for you. And so they have like all developed like such beautiful prayer life, such incredible relationships of their own. My 3 oldest daughters have really beautiful relationships. And, my teenage sons like will drive to adoration on their own. And just like that is such an incredible part of their life. Yeah. So I actually wanted to, if I could, if I can make it through, I wanted to share a poem that one of my daughters wrote for my 50th birthday, which was last year, because I think it gives you a sense of the way in which there's like an appreciation, I think, among all of us for the way grace has worked in my life. Because obviously, like, none of them would be here without like that. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to get through, and I'll stop if I can't, but I'll try. Okay, so it's called The Wave. Okay. So long ago in a dream, my mother saw a wave, tall, towering over her. It was a wave of loneliness, of forgotten promises and cracked floorboards, of loud, empty nights and heavy, silent mornings. It was a wave of not knowing who you are, and so not knowing where you are going. Long ago in the dream, my mother faced this wave. She held her hand out, just one palm, against the dark and swirling magnitude. Somehow, through help invisible, she held it back. Long ago in this dream, my mother held back the wave. But she did not turn around to see all she was protecting there, from the cold cut of the water and the overwhelming hopelessness of being lost at sea. Long ago in this dream, if my mother had turned around to face the shore, she would have seen me.
Wow. That's incredible, Erika. Thank you for sharing that with us. Wow. As we like to say here, we comfort with the comfort with which we have been comforted.
Absolutely.
So thank you for sharing that with us. Yeah. Well, we have about 5 minutes left.
Great.
And so let's see, some housekeeping here. You are now a fellow of the Ethics and Public Policy Centers. How'd that happen?
Yeah. Well, that's its own cool story. So while I was raising my children, I guess after the master's, I got a law degree. Okay. And I got married in my 2nd year of law school and had my first child in my 3rd year of law school, which is its own very interesting thing. Too much story there to tell. And then, I worked for a big firm in Boston this summer before my third year and was offered a job as a first year lawyer. At that point, I was pregnant. And I knew very much, I remember going into the part-time, they had a meeting like, okay, this is a meeting for those who want to be part-time associates. And in the meeting I learned part-time means good 40 hours a week. And I thought, yeah, no, I don't think I want to do that. And I always had a sense that my calling was something more within kind of the legal theory world. I mean, I studied philosophy in college, then theology, and then law. And I love the law, but that whole summer I didn't like the practice of law at all, and I didn't enjoy it, partly because I was sick from being pregnant. But I knew it wasn't for me, and so we also decided that it really made sense. My husband had a good job, and it made sense for me to be home with the kids, and that was a great grace. And I think that part of that was like I can imagine people who have the kind of capacity to be able to juggle a lot. And that was not the capacity I had at that point, I would say. And so I really need to be able to focus and really focus on my marriage, focus on motherhood, focus on prayer, focus on kind of the norms that I did each day, getting to Mass each day, doing the rosary each day, getting to mental prayer and the kinds of things that I knew I needed, like for the stability of my marriage and mothering, which I still need today for all of those things, for sure. But so that was something that was important. And so, but I did know that I could be available to other things. And so I just started getting asked to do things. And partly it was that I, by then, had become very pro-life. So I was invited to edit a volume of essays at the 30th anniversary of Roe versus Wade, which became a book called The Cost of Choice. And it was how women evaluate the impact of abortion. And so it was looking at kind of psychological, physiological, sociological impact of abortion on women. Yeah. And so from that, and I actually had my sort of conversion, not religious conversion story, but my story, kind of intellectual story, but going from being pro-choice to pro-life, which is another story I could have told. Yeah. And so from there, I just started getting asked to go speak. And so that was something like, and I would write little essays here and there, but that was something kind of light, not heavy lifting, but it was something I could do, go to Harvard and talk to the pro-life students, et cetera. And so over time, I started to read more constitutional law, and I just had a lot of time. What was great about having 3 girls in a row is that they just played together all the time. And I'm not a person who is a great decorator of a home. I have a very functional home, and I'm a really hardcore intellectual. So I read all the time. And so part of that reading was I would read, and then during the rosary, I would just have sort of insights, putting things connected, and I would write about them. And so I started to, over time, get asked by professors to come speak, and then get asked, to write something that was more scholarly or academic. And so it was really by invitations kind of solve this question for us. So one of the key things was what are pro-choice feminists in the legal academy? What are their arguments? And so that was for a group of academics. And so I went and did that, and it became kind of this big law review article that was published by the Harvard Journal of Law and Public Policy that was it was basically debunking equal protection arguments for abortion rights. Because this is what they were using, was abortion is necessary for women's equality. And this was something that pro-lifers had kind of dealt with, but not looking into the legal literature and kind of really getting into the legal weeds, so to speak. Right. And so that sort of sent me on a trajectory intellectually where I started to bring together constitutional law, political theory, lots of work on the American founding that I'd done as an undergrad, women's history, and then Catholic social teaching. And all of these kind of came together into sort of a unique trajectory. And so actually before my 7th child was born, during a big gap, I was a visiting scholar at Harvard Law School because I had done a bunch of law review articles by then. And I was working on a book of an intellectual history of women's rights, which I published in 2021. And then since then have been really doing a lot of work in kind of Catholic legal theory, I guess you could say, really sorting out a natural law foundation for the rights of women, because obviously we all know that generally when you think of women's rights, you think of abortion rights, and that is not at all how it was originally conceived or ought to be conceived. And so it's really sort of trying to work on a kind of intellectual foundation with just the gifts that I've been given intellectually to try to do that. So that's been cool. So I've been working on that.
Yeah.
And then the other thing in the minutes we have, which is probably very little, I do a lot of work with education. So I helped to found a Catholic classical school in the Boston area. We started with 23 students. So this is 13 years ago, and we now have, like, it's bursting at the seams, 350 students.
Wow.
It's called St. Benedict Classical Academy. Beautiful building. Look it up online. And now I'm on the board of a girls' school, girls' Catholics independent school there. So working with dear friends, working on the education of girls, which is really near and dear to my heart. And then watching my kids grow up, which is like the best. The coolest thing is to watch your children become, like, outdo you in virtue. And just watch them, like, how, like, just they're beautiful people,
That's the dream.
and how central friendship is, and what good friends they are to others, and that has been a really beautiful thing to watch.
Beautiful. Erika, thank you so much for sharing your story.
Absolutely.
And we'll be praying for your continued good work, and the success of your endeavors. Incredible, powerful stuff.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for being here for this episode of the Journey Home program. I pray that Erika's story is an inspiration to you. We'll be back again next week with another story, but in the meantime, let's keep praying for each other. God bless.